welcome to Vineyard. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Susan, and I was asked by Bill and Barb to come and share a word with you this morning. I'll be honest, I was actually really excited when Bill and Barb asked me, and then all of a sudden yesterday it hit me, and I got really nervous. I was like, oh my gosh, because it's one thing to like go out and speak at a church and you don't really know a lot of people there, and it's another thing to actually speak with your family. But that is absolutely wonderful. I love being here with you and with family, so thank you for having me. Thank you, Bill and Barb. They're actually on an airplane right now flying out to California, those lucky jet setters that they are. But I am really, really thankful for this opportunity to share a little bit about Cherry Street. A lot of people know Cherry Street as being a homeless shelter where we provide meals and shelter to men and women that are homeless. What a lot of people don't know is what we are actually doing to end homelessness. But with that, what I really have on my heart is to talk about really what we deal with at Cherry Street, which is the 3 relational poverties. All right, so in the 3 relational poverties, there's the poverty of soul. So what is my relationship to myself? There is the relational poverty of spirit, which is my relationship to God, and the relational poverty of relating to other people. And so that is what I am going to touch on this morning. So the very first relational poverty that I'm going to go over is the poverty of soul. So how I relate to myself. So the very first slide, it's a really long quote, so I will spare you reading the whole darn thing. I was going to, but it's really long. So I'm actually just going to read the first 2 sentences. I'll have Chris keep the slide up there so you can read the rest of it. But here's a quote. Every one of us is shadowed by an illusory person, a false self. This is the man I want myself to be, but who cannot exist because God does not know anything about him. Whew, right? This is the man I want myself to be, but who cannot exist because God does not know anything about him. That is a quote by Thomas Merton from Brennan Manning's book, Abba's Child. If you know me, you know that Brennan Manning is my most favorite author. I just love his works. So with this, it is so true that I have personally have experienced the poverty of soul. I have struggled many years of knowing my self-worth, living in guilt, living in shame. And so with that, when I first started working at Cherry Street Mission Ministries, I thought I had it together, right? I have a great husband, I have 3 beautiful kids, I have a house in Sylvania, I have 2 dogs. I mean, I was living the suburban life, right? And so, of course, I felt qualified to work at a place like Cherry Street because I've got it together, right? And then I go to Cherry Street and, woo, was it a learning moment for me. At Cherry Street, I realized that I was very much underqualified for the position I was in. So underqualified, in fact, that my supervisor sat down with me and she said, hey, we really don't see you doing what we need you to do. So what we want to do is send you to a training. It's going to cost Cherry Street some money. Or we want to put you in a different position because we really like you. And when she said that to me, I was heartbroken. I felt more like a failure. I felt even more disqualified. And I was just really struggling. And at the end of that day, I remember walking down the stairs, and Max was actually walking up the stairs, and he stopped me, and he looked at me, and he said, so what are your thoughts on what Ashley had talked to you about? And I looked at him, and I could just feel my tears just welling up in my eyes. I felt a lump in my throat, and I looked at Max, and I said, am I worth it? I looked at my brother in Christ, and I asked him, am I worth the effort of being sent to a training? And the look on his face, because he's such a good brother in Christ, he was heartbroken that I even uttered those words, right? And he looked at me and he says, Susan, I don't even know if you remember this or not. He looked at me and he said, Susan, if I could rip my heart out of my chest and show you what I see, I wish you can see it. And I took a step back, and I don't remember the rest of the conversation because that was really so impactful to me. And I went home and I was still a hot mess, still crying a lot. Fast forward, I started digging in more into Cherry Street, and I started realizing that there's so much in me that I did not surrender over to God. There's so much in me that I was ashamed of and felt guilt over. And I got really, really good at doing this. Pick up the rug and sweep it under and forget about it. Keep vacuuming over the rug, keep walking over the rug, walk around the rug, but heck no, I am not going to lift that rug and see what's exposed under there, right? You're going to find a lot of crap under there. And so the invitation at Cherry Street was to dig deeper. It was to understand the poverty of who I am and who God says I am. And so the poverty of soul, so the next slide, is what doesn't belong, right? So if I am living in poverty of soul, I'm living in shame or guilt that leads to feelings of worthlessness. And I have the inability to forgive myself or forgive others. And I didn't even realize that I was living like this until I started hearing more from the voice of God. And so in that, what God was speaking to me is that He has redemption, He has forgiveness, and He has freedom for me. And I did not want to hear it. I will be honest with you. I was comfortable hearing the lies of the enemy. You can get to this point where you get so comfortable living with the lies of the enemy that you forget to hear the voice of God. And so, but this is what happened. God was not going to allow that, right? And so I had this picture of God being this big, scary monster when it came to the things under the carpet. I had this picture of, God is on the other side of a door trying to get in, and here I am pushing against the door, preventing him from getting in, because I'm expecting him to just come in and just be this mean, angry, scary God, and He's going to point out my shame, and He's going to point out my guilt, and He's going to tell me everything I did wrong in my life. But that's not how God is it? Nope. No. When I finally had the courage to open that door, God was just standing there with loving arms and inviting me to just be with Him and to hear Him and to experience what it's like to be loved by a Father like Him. And so that actually takes me to the poverty of spirit. And so poverty of spirit is, how do I relate to God? And so these two Bible verses came up. The first is, for we know that our old self was crucified with Him, so that the body ruled by sin might be done away with, that we should no longer be slaves to sin. Romans 6:6. And then Galatians 2:20 says, I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by the faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave Himself for me. It took some excruciating things to get to this place, because I did not feel like I deserved God's love. I did not feel like I deserved to be rid of my shame, to be rid of my guilt. I felt like I didn't want to allow God inside of me to love me, because gosh, the enemy is so good at that, right? Sitting on your shoulder and constantly reminding you and constantly telling you what you're doing wrong, and it's just terrible. But again, you get comfortable hearing those voices to the point where it's okay. It's okay if I don't deal with it. It's okay if I continue on, right? But God's not like that. And so the door opened, and I was able to really hear from God. And so in the spirit, when I was listening to the lies of the enemy, and I was dealing with the shame, and all of a sudden I'm hearing voices like Max's, what I did was I started to confide in people. So I thought that if I started sharing my story with people that, especially my brothers and sisters in Christ, right? If I started sharing my story, I was going to be judged, I was going to be hated, and that is the farthest lie from the truth. But So what I did was I reached out to my friend Ashley, and we went to a restaurant, Adam Street Cafe, which is right downtown. And I confided in her, and I shared with her my story. And let me tell you, it was the biggest ugly cry of my life. I mean, I sat in this restaurant, and my face is red. I'm like ugly crying, to the point where the waitress came over. She was about to take our order or check in on us, and she's like, "Oh, sweetie, are you okay?" So my friend Ashley, she goes, "She just really wants her poutine," which is really funny. And let me tell you, that was the best poutine I've ever had, because the waitress went back to the cook, and she was like, "There's this poor girl out there, and she is sobbing her eyes out. You need to make her the best darn poutine." I don't think she used the word darn, but you need to make the best darn poutine. And let me tell you, he loaded it up with short ribs, with cheese, with gravy. I mean, it was so good. And I really needed that comfort food, I guess. French fries were extra crispy. Anyway, if you have not had the poutine at Adam Street Cafe, I highly recommend it. So anyway, I'm sitting there and I'm sobbing, and I realized that in that moment that my friend Ashley was not there to judge me, to condemn me, but she was Jesus to me. She heard me, she prayed with me, she encouraged me. She gave me the phone number to a counselor, and I was able to get connected, and that is where that healing started in my life. And I can't even tell you that freedom that I experienced because I was able to find that courage to speak to my friend about something that I was so deeply ashamed of. And so shortly after that, I went through a retreat, and God gifted me and replaced my shame with freedom. And I had never experienced freedom before. And I realized that freedom is a gift as long as you know your worth. If you don't know your worth in Christ, if you don't know who you are in Christ, you cannot experience freedom, okay? You have to know your worth. You have to know that a friend like Max, who's going to look at you and say, "You are, of course, worth it." I had to hear it from my brothers and sisters before I can hear it from the Lord. So my encouragement to you is, if you are struggling with anything at all, any shame, any guilt, this is the safest place for you to do that. Right here with your brothers and sisters in Christ. Do not listen to the lies of the enemy that tells you that Marilyn is going to judge you. Can you imagine Marilyn judging you? I mean, she is the first person that will hug you every Sunday morning, is she not? Right? Bill and Barb, they are the safest place. You can go to their house. They will show up at your house 3 o'clock in the morning. This is a safe place. This is where we can be Jesus to each other, all right? And so that takes me to relational poverty of relating to other people. So when I was finally freed of some of the things of my past, I started seeing people differently, okay? And so this is absolutely one of my favorite verses, which is 2 Corinthians 3:18. And it says this, "And we all, with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit." I just love that phrase, with unveiled face. How often do we cover ourselves with this facade of, I go to church and I have a great family. I literally married the nicest guy in the world. Can you guys think of anybody nicer than Mark Roman? I don't think so, right? I mean, I was hiding behind this facade of everything's okay. I'm fine because I go to church. I'm fine because I have a great husband. But that wasn't good enough for God. God wanted me fully, my full attention. And so when God showed me my worth, which was not in the form of the amount of some training. My worth is what he did for me on the cross, okay? And so when I realized that, I was able to see people differently. Now, a lot of people, because they know I work at Cherry Street, they will ask me questions like, "Is it scary? Don't you guys deal with registered sex offenders? Don't you guys have people with mental health? Don't you guys have people that are drug addicts and prostitutes and all, you name it, X, Y, and Z. Don't you have this? Do you have this?" And the answer is yes, but guess what? I can be in one of those seats too. You can be in one of those seats too, right? It does not matter what adjective we put on somebody else or what adjectives you put on yourself. God has a different story for you. So when I was able to relate to other people, this thing called empathy happened, right? So empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another person. You can go to the next slide. And so there's actually not a Bible verse that says the word empathy, because I looked. But what I did find is actually a lot of verses that have to do with empathy, like rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep, which is Romans 12:15. And so when you come to Cherry Street, or if you're sitting in your workplace, if you're sitting in your living room at your home, anywhere you go, there is opportunity to relate to somebody else. You can be Jesus to somebody else. And yes, we do have a lot of adjectives at Cherry Street, but one of my favorite things that we say there is drop the adjective and gain the human. I'm going to be very vulnerable here and share a story with you about a guest that I really did not like. It wasn't you or anybody else in here. There was a guest at Cherry Street. He was angry all the time. He complained about the food we served. He was vulgar. He cussed a lot. And I'm just going to say maybe he smelled a little bit too. But anyway, every time I saw him in the cafe, he was always complaining about something. And I did not even realize I was putting the adjective of grumpy, mean old man, right, on him. And one day I was walking through the cafe, and I hear my name, hey Sue, Sue, hey Sue. And I turn around, and it was that guest. And I was like, oh, hey, what's up? And now, granted, I was still standing far away enough from him so I didn't have to fully engage because I didn't know what was going to come out of his mouth. But he said, hey, I heard you can help me get a GED. And at that point, I was a vocational manager, and I was like, oh, actually, I can help you get a GED. So I stepped in, I pulled out a chair, and I sat with him, and I heard his story. And in hearing his story, I realized shame on me for placing that adjective on him before I even got the chance to know him. And so when I sat with him, I learned that he was 14 months sober from drugs and alcohol. He grew up with an abusive dad, left at an early age because of the abuse. He couldn't take it anymore, so he left home. He got involved with some unhealthy relationships that got him involved with the drugs and alcohol. And he came to Cherry Street because he wanted to get better. And the reason why he was angry all the time is because he was learning to cope without those drugs and alcohol. He was learning to cope without those unhealthy relationships. And it could be really scary, right? To completely transform your life. It's completely scary and vulnerable to admit, hey, I have an addiction. Hey, I need God in my life. Hey, right? There's so many reasons why we might express anger or unhealthy emotions. And so when I sat with him and I heard his story, I was like, oh my gosh, shame on me. And then after that, we became buddies. I would see him. We got him connected with our basic skills lab where he was able to get tutored for math and reading. But unfortunately, he did leave Cherry Street before we can see him get his GED. He found a job, I think it was like in Florida or something, I'm not even entirely sure. But one day he disappeared, and I believe that he's working somewhere. But every time I saw him after that conversation, it was, hey Sue, hey Phil, hey Sue, hey Phil, and I started seeing him get better. I started seeing him not be so angry all the time. I started seeing him engage with other people, and in fact start encouraging other people too. And that is what happens when you start relating to people right where they're at and be Jesus to them. You start seeing that transformation happening. And so drop the adjective, gain the human. So in summary, what is relational health? So soul, I am pursuing God, who God created me to be. I am no longer struggling in my pursuit of self-worth, confidence, and forgiveness. Is it easy? Heck no, it is not. And that's why I'm saying I am no longer struggling in my pursuit. So always pursue the voice of God. Try to hear what he is saying to you over the voice of the enemy. And it's so easy to get confused at times, but the more you engage and the more you open the door to God, the more you're able to hear so clearly his voice over the voice of the enemy. Spirit, God's voice, okay, there we go. God's voice is louder than the lies of the enemy. I am allowing God to heal areas in my life that is keeping me from knowing his love for me fully. Okay? So when you hear the voice of God, oh my goodness, it is beautiful, it is lovely, it is inviting, it is for you, it is for me, it is for every person that you touch. If you are looking at somebody and you find yourself placing an adjective on them, stop yourself and consider that they are a child of God. They just don't know it yet, okay? And their relationships, I am healthy in my relationship to myself and pursue my understanding of God. I am able and willing to love others as God loved me. Again, not easy, because we know a lot of difficult people, don't we? I know a lot of difficult people, actually, and there's circumstances that will happen. But when you take a step back and really hear the voice of God, you know, what is he saying to you about that person you're having difficulty with? You may have experienced hurt over and over and over again by the same people. So what is God saying to you about that? At Cherry Street, you'll find a lot of people that have been with us for a few years. You'll see people that you see once and then you never see them again. 40% of the guests that we serve are in transition. They're only with us for 2 weeks or less. 50% of guests are with us for 2 years or less, and then that remaining 10% is what is reoccurring homelessness. And those are people that have experienced trauma after trauma after trauma, and they do not know how to have healthy relationships. And so if unhealthy relationships is the number one reason why somebody comes to Cherry Street, guess what the number one way is to get them out? Healthy relationships, right? And so at Cherry Street, we are building lots of healthy relationships around our guests. We have a Renewed Mind that has an office right on our second floor where we can walk guests immediately upstairs to meet with one of the social workers and counselors. We have a relationship with Wren Hill for staffing purposes. They can help with resume writing, job applications, job interviewing skills, which is so very important. A couple of years ago, we had a guest that interviewed for a local business right downtown here. And when they asked him the question, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? He went into a 20-minute monologue about why he hates his mother. Eek! Don't do that in a job interview, right? So that is why it's so important that we build these healthy relationships around people so that we can set them up for success. We also have a relationship with Owens Community College and Northwest State Community College, and they're teaching all of our vocational classes at Cherry Street. But one of our most important relationships is the church. And so we love when the church can get involved and be Jesus to every single man and every single woman. You do not have to be a guest of Cherry Street to be Jesus with them, right? Our staff can use people as well. So if you come in and you want to encourage our staff. We are in there working with our guests. You know, sometimes we get cussed out at. Sometimes we have to clean poop on the floor. Sometimes we have to clean up puke. It's a messy job, and people can get messy, not just physically or anything like that, but just all the stuff that's in here and up here could get really messy. So be Jesus to every single person that you come across. Don't forget who God says you are and who your identity in Christ is. So with that, did that go by really fast? Was that like 5 minutes? I feel like it was like 5 minutes. Oh my goodness. When I practiced yesterday, it was like 30 minutes. I don't feel like that was 30 minutes though.
23.
Oh, 23 minutes. Okay. Oh, that just went by really fast. Okay. So I'm actually going to have Stacy come back up here. I don't know if you want the whole worship team or just you, whatever. She's going to come back here and she's going to lead us in a last song. But during this time, if you are relating to anything that I said about keeping things under a rug and you want to feel the confidence and the courage to come out and share, or if you want to just get some prayer to start that next step into freedom. We have a great but ministry team here willing to pray with you. Talk to your neighbor. This is not a scary place, okay, you guys? I cannot emphasize enough. It is in this room with your brothers and sisters in Christ that you can be open with and that we can be Jesus with one another, okay? So thank you, and if you want to learn more about Cherry Street or you want to learn more about anything at all, cooking Korean food, I don't know, you can come see me, all right? Thank you.
Absolutely.